أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا وشفيع ذنوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا أبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين، واللعنة الدائم على أعدائهم أجمعين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله الحكيم في محكم كتابه الكريم: أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. ومن الليل فتهجت به نافلة عسى أن يبعثك ربك مقاما محمودا. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوات الله. For the love of our beloved Prophet and his beloved progeny, please recite a second loud salawat. For the hastening in the return of our beloved 12th Imam, a third final loud salawat. The topic that we will be discussing tonight, inshallah, is the topic of the concept of intercession, or what we would refer to in the Arabic language as the idea and the concept of ash-shafa'ah. Of course, ash-shafa'ah is different from the idea and the concept of tawassul. When we are speaking of the idea of shafa'ah, we are referring mainly to the idea of the forgiveness of the sins of a human being because of that love and affection that he has towards certain individuals. And this is a topic that ties in very closely with these days and nights, because the reality is, during these days and nights, we find every opportunity that we possibly can to show our love and affection to the Ahlul Bayt, to Imam al-Hussein, to the companions of Imam al-Hussein, to Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas, someone that we might commemorate on a day or a night like this. And at the same time that we do all of this, and we do all of these different acts of worship, remembering the Imam in the name of Imam al-Hussein, many of us at the end of the day might raise our hands and pray and ask for the shafa'ah of Imam al-Hussein on the day of judgment. Many of us have read, for example, in Ziyarat Ashura, Allahumma arzuqni shafa'at al-Hussein yawm al-wurud. Oh Allah, grant me the shafa'ah and the intercession of Imam al-Hussein on that day where I enter into the day of judgment. And many other phrases that we have heard of, and many other phrases that we are very familiar with. You might have been in your tashahhud, and at the end of the tashahhud you might say, وَتَقَبَّلْ شَفَاعَتَهُ. And when the Prophet asks for his shafa'ah on that day, Ya Allah, accept his shafa'ah, وَارْفَعْ دَرَجَتَهُ. Yes, and elevate his status. And beyond that, you find more of this idea that the Ahlul Bayt might be able to play this role on that day. For example, when the narrator asked, why is it that the Prophet is referred to with the title of Abu al-Qasim, the Imam gives him a number of different explanations. And when he continues to say Zidni, asking more and more, you find that the Imam at one point, in one of the definitions, he says yes, because he is the one who has that close relationship with Ali ibn Abi Talib. And Ali ibn Abi Talib is Qasimun Nari wal Jannah. He is the one who decides who goes on this side, who goes on that side. And of course, this is not an arbitrary categorization. It is based on principles and the way this person has lived his life. Nonetheless, the shafa'ah of the Ahlul Bayt is something that we always yearn for. We always ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for. All of that is wonderful and great. Up until this part of the discussion is easy. This part moving forward becomes a little difficult. Because when you talk about shafa'ah and you say it means that some of your sins might be forgiven because of this relationship that you have, it sounds wonderful, but the flip side also comes into the discussion, because there might be those who may not be able to benefit from this relationship like you are benefiting from this relationship. And this brings under question the justice of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yes, speaking of the forgiveness, showing forgiveness towards someone is very easy. Where the discussion becomes a bit difficult is the justice of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How is this fair? We always read in the verses of the Quran that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the fairest of fair. He is ahkamul hakimin. He is the best of judges. And you would hope and assume that a judge would deal with different people based on the same principles. And yet here you are finding yourself saying that yes, this shafa'ah is there for me and my sins might be forgiven, whereas another person, his sins may not be forgiven. And this raises many questions naturally. Therefore, tonight we want to take some time to delve into this topic, and it is a lengthy one, and inshallah we'll try to wrap it up in this one night that we have on this topic. We will do so by posing the following questions. Number one, what does the word shafa'ah mean literally, and where in the verses of the Quran do we come across this word? Number two, does the Quran not tell us that on that day there is no shafa'ah that is accepted? No one can carry the burden of sin of another person. Aren't these verses of the Quran? And if they are, and they truly are, how are these compatible with this concept of shafa'ah that we hear so much of within the Shia school of thought? Number three, if shafa'ah is something that is going to happen on that day, who are the individuals, who are the entities who have permission to play this role on that day? Is it just the Ahlul Bayt, or are there other things that can play the role of shafa'ah in this world and in the next world? Number four, when someone does shafa'ah, when Imam al-Hussein does shafa'ah, when the Prophet does shafa'ah, any of them who do shafa'ah, does this entail and does this mean that all of a sudden they have become more merciful than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself? Meaning that Allah has decreed for someone to enter into hellfire, and yet this person from Ahlul Bayt or the Prophet stops this process. It almost seems as though this person is becoming even more merciful than God himself. That's question number four. Question number five, is it only the Shia school of thought amongst the schools of thought within Islam who believe in this idea and concept of shafa'ah? Or do other schools of thought share this belief as well? Number six, according to the ahadith of our school of thought, is it only the Shia that will benefit from the shafa'ah on the Day of Judgment? Or do other schools of thought also benefit from the shafa'ah as well? And number seven, and finally, is the shafa'ah of the Ahlul Bayt a green light for me to do as I wish and live my life as I wish in the hopes of this shafa'ah forgiving all of my sins? Or are there conditions to this shafa'ah? And do we even know what these conditions are, or might they be very vague? Tonight, inshallah, we'll delve into these 7 questions with a loud salawat ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Allow us to begin from here. The reality is that this word shafa'ah has a very interesting meaning. The word shafa'ah literally means when you do indhimam, when you bring one thing towards another thing. You do dhamma of one thing to another thing. And in the context of theological discussions, when they speak about the concept of shafa'ah, what they mean is that this human being, this creature, him by himself and just with his own deeds and his own faith and his own reputation, he is not able to qualify for the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There needs to be someone, something that joins him, and then he presents himself to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He needs this indhimam to happen. He needs this shafa'ah to happen. Someone to join him, then along with that person. And with that person, he can approach Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and ask for the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Interestingly enough, when you go to the verses of the Quran, initially at least, you find the verses of the Quran are pretty straightforward about this issue. They are pretty clear-cut about this issue. That on that day, don't come to the Day of Judgment hoping for this relationship to help you, that relationship to help you. Yes, that is how things happen in this world. in this world you have relationships, you might be a wrongdoer, you might do something wrong, your relationship is able to get you out of the situation. But on the Day of Judgment, the Quran says multiple times that, listen, don't come there hoping that someone else is going to bear the brunt of your sin. No, in this world, other people bear the brunt of your sin at times. In the next world, you will have to bear the brunt and the burden of your sin. And the Quran multiple times, for example, in Surah Al-Baqarah says, وَلَا تُقْبَلُ مِنْهَا شَفَاعَةٌ. The shafa'ah on that day is not accepted. وَلَا يُقْبَلُ مِنْهَا عِدْلٌ or عَدْلٌ. There will be no replacement that is accepted. You can't replace yourself with someone else. You can't give a fida or a fidya for these sins to replace what? The punishment that you have to go through. It doesn't work like that. This is what the Quran tells us on multiple occasions. But then when you look deeper into these verses of the Quran, then you find, no, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has two different tones when it comes to the concept of shafa'ah. Sometimes, yes, as a general statement, He says, listen, don't come there hoping for your relationships to work out on that day and help you out on that day. Then in other verses of the Quran, you find a particular wording almost as if He is making an exception. This shafa'ah generally don't have hope in it, but then sometimes you can have hope in it. And you find the wording that the verses of the Quran use is two wordings. Sometimes they say the shafa'ah of the one who has been given permission to do shafa'ah. His shafa'ah, that one is accepted. إِلَّا مَنْ أَذِنَ لَهُ الرَّحْمَنِ. The one who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given idhn to him, yes, his shafa'ah is different. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, sometimes the wording is not idhn. Sometimes He says, those we will accept their shafa'ah of them who have an ahd with us, a covenant with us. We have some sort of a agreement with them. Them, if they come and do shafa'ah for us or for you, then this is going to be acceptable. And this is a general approach that the Quran has. Many times you will find the Quran will make a general statement on a topic, and then as you move on with the verses of the Quran, you will find there are specific statements that have to do with specific types of that general statement. And this is something we use in our normal conversations all the time. You might be sitting, for example, with a friend of yours. Maybe you travel to another city. You don't like that city for whatever reason. And you're sitting with a friend of yours. And in this conversation with your friend, you say, you know, the people of this city, I don't like them. And yet your friend is a people of this city. But that's a general statement you're making, and on the side it is already clear that when you're making this general statement, your friend, for whatever reason that you've made clear other times, is not part of that general statement. And this is a common thing in our conversations and in the verses of the Quran as well. Many times Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will say, you have to pray, aqimus salat. And then there are certain times He'll say, no, in these situations you don't have to pray, for example. This is a common thing. You have to fast, but in these situations, I'm making an exception. This is a common thing we find in the verses of the Quran. And the interesting thing is, when you find the Quran making this exception and saying, you know what, shafa'ah here is accepted, but here is not accepted, it's not that they're the same type of shafa'ah. They are different types of shafa'ah. They're different types. In essence, they are different. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, listen, if you come to me with the first category of shafa'ah, I'm not going to accept it. With the second category of shafa'ah, I will accept it. So what's the difference? What's the difference between this one and that one? At the end of the day, this person is coming, someone is playing the role of an intercessor, he's interceding on his behalf, and his sins are going to be forgiven. So what's the difference here? He says, this is the difference. And this is an interesting point, and one that will help us with answering some of the other questions that we have tonight. The difference is this: who initiated this process? If it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala points to a servant and He says, this servant of mine can play the role of shafa'ah, and you go through that servant, this is shafa'atu haqqin. This is the true shafa'ah. This is the shafa'ah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has allowed. He has given permission for it. He will accept this shafa'ah. So, well, what's the other side? The other side is, no, when you go and choose who's going to intercede on your behalf. This shafa'ah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, this is worth nothing in my eyes. I have a friend, I have someone who's very wealthy. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says this is worth nothing in my eyes. I have another person, he has a lot of connections. This is worth nothing in my eyes. Show up on the day of judgment, you think you're powerful, you think you're wealthy, you think you're popular, you think this, you think that. None of it works out on that day. But if you went through the one who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had appointed, who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had told you to go to for shafa'ah, then this is different. He says, no, this shafa'ah, I initiated this process. I told you who to go to. There's a fundamental difference in all of it. He knows who has that status. Therefore, he has to point to someone and say, this person can play the role of shafi'. If he does that, he is initiating that process. Therefore, that person is a person whose shafa'ah has been allowed. أَذِنَ لَهُ الرَّحْمَنُ. Or his shafa'ah is a shafa'ah that comes from a covenant that he has with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. إِلَّا مَنِ اتَّخَذَ عِنْدَ الرَّحْمَنِ عَهْدًا. He's taken an ahd with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given him this promise, this covenant, that you can play this role. If it's a relationship that he initiates, then this shafa'ah is very true and it holds value and you can go through it. And this answers one of the most important questions when it comes to the concept of shafa'ah, and that is this: if someone is doing the intercession on my behalf, doesn't that person become more merciful than God himself? You and I, the way we explain shafa'ah to our children, in our communities as a general concept, we say what? Say, this person showed up on the day of judgment. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did his accounting. He said, you have to go to, na'udhu billah, the hellfire. You have to be punished. And then all of a sudden, forgive my wording, all of a sudden, Imam al-Hussein shows up and he says, no, we have to stop this process. He shouldn't be going to the hell, he has to go to heaven. The way we picture it, it's almost as if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is kind of mercy, but Imam Hussein is the ultimate mercy. That's not how it works. Why? Because when Imam al-Hussein plays this role, this whole process was initiated by who? By Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We look at the mercy of Allah and then we look at the mercy of the Ahlul Bayt. Many of us might think, if God doesn't forgive me, then maybe through shafa'ah. The reality is shafa'ah is a manifestation of the mercy of God. It's just running through this family. Therefore, whatever they do, even if they forgive thousands of servants of God, it's just God at work through them. That's as simple as it is. His mercy is going through them. Ya Allah, couldn't we have just gone to you directly? Why this whole idea of come to me through these individuals? This question is a valid question. It comes up in the topic of shafa'ah. It comes up in the topic of tawassul as well. Isn't God already out there? Can I just go directly to him? You can. Of course you can. Can't I just ask for the forgiveness of my sins directly from God? Yes, of course. We'll talk more about that tonight, inshallah. But there is a reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes them the channel of his mercy. There's a reason for it. One of the reasons is to introduce them to you and have them to be part of your life. It's one of the reasons. Why? Because you benefit when they are part of your life. You benefit when they are your role models. This is one of the reasons of it. Yes, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you can always raise your hand and say, Ya Allah, forgive me. That's it. If someone does tawbah like this, the tawbah is not accepted. No, it's 100% accepted. And yet you find we are also taught at times that you go through this family as well. And they each have their own wisdom. One of the wisdoms is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to have this family to be there for you. Wants them to be your role model. He wants them to be those individuals that you look up to all of the time. So he wants to get them involved in this process one way or another. One of those ways is he says, listen, if you want my shafa'ah, you have to come to me through these individuals. Yes, you can go to him directly as well, but this is another channel that he has placed there. Therefore, this relationship has been initiated by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself. Therefore, whatever happens within this process is under the umbrella of the mercy of God anyways. Therefore, whatever they do, they will never be more merciful than this person or that person. They will never be more merciful than God, because he's the one who pointed towards them anyways. Recite a salawat, please. If we understand this now, let us delve into this idea of who has this role, who can play this role of shafa'ah, who can say something or ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on my behalf, and because of that, my sins are forgiven. This concept of shafa'ah, I don't want to make it too complicated, but it is something that also applies to this world as well, meaning that you can have shafa'ah happen while you're alive in this world as well. There are certain people who might pray for you, and because of that, certain sins of yours might be forgiven. And of course, shafa'ah, the greatest manifestation of it is in the next world, where your hands are cut off and your hands are tied essentially. You no longer have any options. There's no more chance for you to change things on your own. And that's where shafa'ah shows itself even more. But shafa'ah as a general idea is the forgiveness of your sins through the intercession of another person. It can happen while you're alive as well. And if you look at it this way, you will find it's not just the Ahlul Bayt who can play this role. There are multiple entities who can play this role of shafa'ah. The first of them at times are the angels. The Quran tells us that the angels will ask for the forgiveness of the believers at times. Amongst them, number two, are certain believers, special servants of God. They can intercede on behalf of some of the other servants of Allah. The details of these are not drawn up for us exactly how it's going to play out. You just find these concepts mentioned in Quran and Hadith. How exactly would it work? If I have one good friend, will that forgive all of my sins? We don't know. We don't know the details. We just know their general ideas. That yes, a believer at times, if he has a good status with Allah, he can play the role of shafa'ah for another believer. That's number two. Number three, amongst those things that can play the role of shafi' is none other but the Quran. The one who has a special relationship with the Quran. And the hadith in the book of Al-Kafi says, Kitabu Fadl al-Quran, the chapter on Fadl al-Quran, which is a pretty lengthy chapter. The Imam starts to narrate this hadith. And he shares this hadith. He says, there are those on the day of judgment who received a special shafa'ah because of their relationship with the Quran. And he says the Quran will take on a physical appearance on that day, and he will start to walk in front of the thousands and millions of servants of God who are standing in lines. They are waiting for their judgment. And the hadith says he starts to walk, and the servants of God, most of them do not realize who this person is because they never had a relationship with him. So when he shows up on that day, they don't know who he is. And the narration says they are asked, do you know who this is? They say, no, we don't know who this is. We just know he's a very pure being. That's all we know. But we don't know who he is. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addresses the Quran, because the Quran tells Allah, Ya Allah, all of your servants, most of them, they neglected me. But amongst your servants, there were those who had a special relationship with me. They stayed up during nights reciting me. They used to understand me. They used to act upon me. They used to defend me. And he says, you know what? Go and find that servant of mine and have him walk into heaven with you. And the narration continues. It says the Quran continues to walk and continues to walk, and people don't know who this is until he stands in front of one person, and this one person is asked by the Quran, do you know who I am? He says, yes, I know who you are. And the Quran says, you know who I am, because I am the one who used to keep you up at night. I am the one who used to recite. I am the one that you had to deal with all of the labels because you believed in me. I am the one who you used to have to go through a hard time because you used to recite me. And then he turns to Allah, the Quran turns to Allah and he says, this servant of yours. And he takes him into heaven, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blesses him. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addresses the Quran, is this enough? And the Quran says, Ya Allah, this is not enough. Add more to him. And the hadith says that he adds more and more blessings to him until the Quran says, Raditu, I am happy now. The Quran. That's why the hadith says, Al-Quranu shafi'un or shafi'un mushaffa'. He does shafa'ah, his shafa'ah is accepted. That's how it works with the Quran. That's number 3, the Quran. Amongst the other things or other beings that can do shafa'ah on that day are the prophets of Allah. And the hadith says that each prophet can have his own shafa'ah for his own ummah, other prophets of Allah. Then you come to number 5 and number 6. And of course number 6 is the Ahlul Bayt and the Prophet. But before you get to the Prophet and the Ahlul Bayt and their shafa'ah, you will find a concept and a being and an entity and a concept that can play the role of shafa'ah. Dare I say, his shafa'ah might even be more encompassing than the shafa'ah of the Ahlul Bayt. That's a scary statement. The shafa'ah of this concept and this thing, in some ways, is more encompassing. Because if you remember, we define shafa'ah as something that can lead to the forgiveness of your sins in this world or the next. Yes? Some of them are in this world, some of them are in the next, some of them in both. What shafi' is this? Whose shafa'ah can be more encompassing than Ahlul Bayt and Prophet? This is not something we are familiar with, not something we are used to, yes? But the hadith of the Ahlul Bayt says, that concept is none but the tawbah that you can do right here, right now. Why is it more encompassing than the shafa'ah of the Ahlul Bayt? For 2 reasons. Number 1, when you do tawbah in this world, it doesn't matter what sin you had committed. Even if you were mushrik, you were the staunchest enemy of the Prophet, if you do tawbah, what happens? It's forgiven. But if you show up on the day of judgment as a mushrik, someone who rejected the faith, will shafa'ah of the Ahlul Bayt apply to you? Not at all. Tawbah, more encompassing. Number 1. Number 2, a concept that is very, very important, and that is mentioned in hadith. When you do tawbah right here, right now, what happens? From this moment all the way till Qiyamah, you have a clear path. Your sins have been forgiven. But the shafa'ah of the Ahlul Bayt is there for Qiyamah. That's why hadith says, if you show up with sins that you didn't repent from, the hadith says, وَلَكِنِّي وَاللَّهِ أَتَخَوَّفُ عَلَيْكُمْ فِي الْبَرْزَخِ. The day of judgment, we are there, but what about your barzakh? Yes, the shafa'ah of the Ahlul Bayt will do wonders on that day, we know that. But tawbah? Why is it that we have this culture that in the back of our mind we say, yeah, I can do this, I can do that, but there's this shafa'ah there. Here's the thought that I want us to walk away with. If the shafa'ah of the Ahlul Bayt will do wonders on that day for sinners, imagine what that love and affection and that relationship can do for you if you show up as a pure individual. If the shafa'ah of the Ahlul Bayt can take someone out of the hellfire and into heaven, imagine what it can do for the one who's already headed towards heaven. Why is it you and I sit there and say, yeah, inshallah shafa'ah? No, you want a greater shafi' that can apply to you right here, right now, work wonders for you right now, right here? That's tawbah. And that's why the hadith of our beloved Imam, he says, La shafi'a anjahu min at-tawbah. There is no person who does shafa'ah, there's nothing that does shafa'ah that is more successful, more powerful than the tawbah of the human being. This is what it is. They expected us to do tawbah. Yes, the final option, number 6, is the Prophet and the Ahlul Bayt. And of course, within the Shia school of thought, we have more literature on this than we could possibly cover. Multiple verses of the Quran, hadith says this relates to the concept of shafa'ah. The surah that we mentioned on the first night, وَلَسَوْفَ يُعْتِيكَ رَبُّكَ فَتَرْضَى. Ya Rasulullah, we will grant to you so much until you are happy. The narration says this is the status of shafa'ah on that day. And in other verses of the Quran, verse 73 of Surah Al-Isra, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells the Prophet, عَسَىٰ أَن يَبْعَثَكَ رَبُّكَ مَقَامًا مَحْمُودًا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will grant to you that great status. What is that great status? Shia and Sunni have narrated this is the concept of shafa'ah. That is there, of course that is there. And that's why very beautifully in a conversation that the companion of Imam al-Baqir is having with him, he asks him, he says, Ya Muhammad ibn Ali, Ya ibn Rasulullah, what's the most hopeful verse of the Quran? Most hopeful verse of the Quran. And beautifully, Imam al-Baqir, he flips the question back to him. He says, what do people say? What do people think is the most hopeful verse of the Quran? And he says, Ya ibn Rasulullah, of course it's the famous verse, Ya ibadi alladhina asrafu ala anfusihim, la taqnatu min rahmatillah. Don't lose hope in the mercy of Allah. Inna Allah yaghfiru dhunuba jami'a. He forgives all of these sins all at once. Don't lose hope. And the Imam says, this is good, but this is not what the Ahlul Bayt say. The Ahlul Bayt say there is a more hopeful verse of the Quran. Because this tawbah you can do while you're alive, yes? But then when you go to the next world, there's no more tawbah. There's nothing left for you at that point. No options. He says, you know, the most hopeful verse of the Quran, وَلَسَوْفَ يُعْطِيكَ رَبُّكَ فَتَرْضَى. And then 3 times the hadith says, the Imam said, Wallah ash-shafa'ah. I swear by Allah, this is shafa'ah that the verse is referring to. This is a completely understood idea within the Shia school of thought. Then you say, well, in the Shia school of thought, yes, this is understood. Is this a belief that is exclusive only to the Shia school of thought? Do other schools of thought also believe in this idea? And the answer is yes. Other schools of thought also believe in this idea of shafa'ah. And of course, when we speak about the schools of thought within Islam, you are speaking about many denominations. So you have to be careful not to generalize. But predominantly you can say that yes, that belief in the shafa'ah is there. Yes, there are differences of opinion as to how should you approach this idea. Should you be going to the shrine of a ma'soom or a saint, for example, or someone who's respected in your religion and asking them for shafa'ah? Of course, other schools of thought will have different opinions about this issue, yes? Should you be asking someone who's left this world already, who in their opinion is passed away, he is not alive, he is dead? Should you be asking this person for things? No, this person has left this world. Who are you asking anyways? They have differences of opinion here. But the very idea that the Prophet will play this role is already there. Not only that, we have narrations in Bukhari that tell us, no, this Prophet of ours will play the role of ash-shafa'atul kubra. What is ash-shafa'atul kubra? The greatest shafa'ah. The hadith says in al-Bukhari that there will be people who will show up on that day. They will go to their own prophets. And their own prophets will say, listen, on a day like this, Muhammad will be able to solve your problem. Recite a salawat, please. And the narration continues and continues until the Prophet says, yes, on that day, all of the people will come to me, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make me the judge. He will make me the one who will decide. This is the ultimate mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Even other schools of thought have a trace of this. Moving on to the next question, inshallah. Is this concept of shafa'ah something within our school of thought, based on our hadith? Is it something that only the Shia will benefit from? Or is it possible that someone outside of the Shia school of thought will also benefit from this shafa'ah? The answer to this question is a very critical one, because many times you and I, we are labeled with the idea that yes, these individuals, they have their own little, forgive me, cult. They have their own little group. They say we're chosen people of God. Whatever we do, we're good on the day of judgment. There's the shafa'ah, they believe whatever they do, at the end of the day, they're going to be fine, and they exclude everyone else. Whereas when you look into the ahadith, you find that no, there seems to be a general shafa'ah that the Prophet mentions, and these are our ahadith. I'm not speaking about the ahadith of other schools of thought. In our ahadith, there seems to be this shafa'ah that the Prophet speaks of for his ummah. He keeps saying ummati, ummati. And then there is the specific shafa'ah that the Ahlul Bayt do for their Shia. Yes, the one who turned away from the truth, and he knew the truth of this school of thought and he turned away from it, as this person is going to have problems, there's no doubt about that. But the one who was part of this ummah, and this is all that he understood from the truth, yes, then at the end of the day he's Muslim, and this is the Quran that he believes in, and this is the Qibla towards which he prays, and this was his understanding of Islam. He did not have the chance to enter into the Shia school of thought, for example. Our hadith point towards the idea that even this person will benefit. Yes, the one who turned away out of inad, the one who turned away out of juhud, as the Quran says, of course, that person, separate discussion, that person will have serious problems, regardless of which school of thought he comes from. If he fundamentally turned away from the truth, then this is a serious problem that he's going to have. But someone who didn't know, but was within the confines of the Muslim Ummah, it seems as though this shafa'ah extends. Yes, there seems to be a specific shafa'ah offered to those who were followers of the Ahlul Bayt. Because the hadith says that the Prophet does shafa'ah for his ummah, and we do shafa'ah for our Shia. This is very important. This is not some cult. This is not some little group that only 1%, 2%, 10% of the ummah will benefit from this shafa'ah, 90%, 80%, whatever the case might be, the rest of them, no. That doesn't seem to be what our ahadith are pointing to. Recite a salawat, please. Moving on to the final point that we will be discussing for tonight, and that is this. At the end of the day, whenever you speak about this idea of shafa'ah, this question always comes up. Is this therefore a green light for me to do as I wish, to live my life as I wish, to go about life as I wish, and then at the end of the day say, yes, this shafa'ah will take care of everything? Is this how the Ahlul Bayt taught us about this concept of shafa'ah? That yes, you've heard sometimes in poetry, the love of Ali, if you have it, there is no ma'asiyah that can hurt you. Is this what the Ahlul Bayt taught us? No, it doesn't seem to be what the Ahlul Bayt taught us. There seems to be conditions for this shafa'ah. And here is the scary part. It seems as though we don't know exactly what these conditions even are. At the end of the day, if the Ahlul Bayt had given us a checklist, they said, you want to benefit from this shafa'ah, this is what you have to do. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I would do those 5 things, you would do those 5 things. The rest of the things you wouldn't care about. Say their shafa'ah will take care of it. The problem is, it doesn't seem like they ever gave us a checklist. And at the same time, they spoke of this concept of shafa'ah. And it's very clear they're trying to keep you and I between khawf and raja. Don't lose all of your hope, but don't have too much hope either. Yes, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is very merciful. Because of us, He will do many things, the Ahlul Bayt will tell you, but there's no guarantee that you'll qualify, because you don't know the conditions. Yes, sometimes here or there you will find 1 or 2 conditions here or there. For example, the idea of the one who takes his salat lightly has been mentioned in multiple ahadith. That the Imam was on his deathbed, he said the person who doesn't take his salat, seriously, he takes his salat lightly, his shafa'ah, our shafa'ah will not benefit him. La tanalu shafa'atana. He's going to have issues. Okay, but what other conditions are there? It seems as though you will struggle to find these. It's not like some clear-cut checklist, you do 1 through 5, then you're good to go. But there is one condition. There's one condition that we are 100% sure about. And that is this. The Quran says that we will not accept shafa'ah illa liman irtada. Shafa'ah will not be done for anyone unless that or that person who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased with his faith. Doesn't really solve our problem very much. He says, yes, only the one who He is pleased with their faith. Oh, this is still very vague. And it's supposed to be like that for a reason. But beautifully, there is one condition that will be removed, or one group that will definitely be removed. Who is this? Because the Quran says, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَرْضَى عَنِ الْقَوْمِ الْفَاسِقِينَ. The one who gives himself a green light to sin easily, openly, publicly. This person, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not pleased with him. This is the one group that you can definitely exclude. Who is this person? The person who sits back and says, this shafa'ah is there so I can do whatever I want. This person is definitely not the one who will benefit from shafa'ah. It's the one group you can definitely exclude. This is the beauty of our religion. If you want to take it like a green light, you are guaranteed to be deprived of it. It's very airtight in terms of the rules, yes? There's no loopholes. Let me do these 5 things on the checklist and then I'll be fine. No. If you take shafa'ah to be a green light, you definitely will be deprived of shafa'ah. That's the way it works. لا يرضى عن القوم الفاسقين. And Imam al-Khomeini has a very beautiful line in his book, the 40 ahadith that he has, where he discusses 40 ahadith on different akhlaqi topics. When he comes to the topic of asabiyya, and he's discussing how important it is for you and I to work on these things and to change these things before it's too late. He says, one of the most important tricks that shaitan will pull off with people is at the end of the day, he will sit there and he will say, listen, you don't have to change too much. Shafa'ah will take care of it. This is a big claim. And if it wasn't someone like him, I wouldn't be saying this. He says this is one of the tricks of shaitan. This is how he deceives people. He says, yes, don't work on yourself. Don't worry about it. At the end of the day, shafa'ah will take care of it. And then he draws this correlation between your faith and your practicing of the religion and shafa'ah that is incredible. He says, don't sit there and ignore practicing the religion in the hopes of shafa'ah. Because shafa'ah is the manifestation of the Ahlul Bayt in the next world. Their guidance in the next world, their help in the next world, it manifests through their shafa'ah. He says that help, that guidance, that assistance has manifested itself in this world through the halal and haram that they brought to us. The more you hold on to this halal and haram, the more qualified you become over there. The less you hold on to this halal and haram, the less qualified you become over there. You want to make yourself more qualified? You and I, we have to work harder. He says, don't sit there and say, yeah, I can do whatever I want to do. No, this is the words of shaitan. Whatever shows up in that world as their manifestation, in this world it's showing up as what? The teachings that they brought to you. The more you hold on to it here, the more you will benefit from it over there. And na'udhu billah, I don't hold on to it here. God forbid I give myself a green light to do as I wish. You never know if we will even benefit from it in the next world. This shafa'ah, therefore, is an incredibly important concept in the upbringing and the building of the character of the believer, but it is built in such a way so beautifully to keep the human being between khawf and raja at all times. At all times he says, am I going to qualify for this? But at the same time they speak about how great it is. Never loses hope and is never too hopeful at the same time. With that, inshallah, we'll bring tonight's talk to an end. Rahimallahu